Welcome to Compliance Chronicles, where we learn from professionals shaping the world of compliance. I'm your host, Lisa Thomas, outside privacy and compliance counsel, an adjunct professor at Northwestern Law School, and a lifelong learner of organizational change. From personal journeys to hard-earned lessons, these are the chronicles that inspire and guide. Let's dive in. I have with me today someone who I have worked with for a long time. So I have Jill Cusack, who supports a family of companies.
So right now I am the privacy officer and assistant vice president for regulatory implementation for a group of family-owned financial services companies. So I work with broker-dealers, insurance carriers, and other types of financial regulated institutions.
So this leads us to our first sort of topic of conversation, which you've already started, which is your journey and how you got to where you are. Tell me a little bit about that journey for you. How did you first get into it and the path that you got to where you are right now?
My compliance interest started back in college, taking different business, government, economics classes, and starting to see the role that government regulation had on different types of businesses. It was really fascinating to me. I'd grown up with my dad as a small business owner in a field that wasn't very heavily regulated. I kind of fell into the trap that a lot of people do of not knowing exactly what I wanted to be when I grew up, when I graduated college, but I was very interested in this regulation concept. So I did a master's degree in public administration because I really wanted to understand how regulatory entities work, what makes them tick, what they believed that their own scope of influence was compared to what I had learned when I was taking the business classes in college. My awareness of privacy compliance had started with some issues that began to affect me, just different notices I had received from companies I worked with, and started digging a little bit deeper along the lines of what's that mean? I hadn't considered that before. And I became very interested in privacy because it was very obvious that this was something that was still emerging, it was evolving.
So what are some of the things in your experience in the privacy space, in the compliance space, that has been really challenging?
So I think I'll tackle that question more from what are we still fighting against every day that we may never overcome? That's going to be the fact that privacy is still very much an emerging field. Instead of a lot of compliance factors where you're either educating the consumer about what reasoning the business has for whatever they've just done to them, or educating the business on why the regulator said they can't do that anymore, you kind of have that coming from both directions in the privacy world. You've got a lot of technology that various parts of a business may not understand, that consumers and users may not understand. But then you've also got nuances around consumer preferences that technologists may not have considered before, or that may not have ever been codified or phrased exactly the way they are for the business to start thinking about. So working in privacy compliance right now almost feels like being a bit of a simultaneous translator, learning that well enough that I can explain to a consumer who is very technology naive, who calls in off the street wanting to know, why did that just happen? But also explaining to all of the IT people who may be excited about a new technology they've just developed, all the considerations they need to be thinking about in terms of how that may affect transparency, consumer choice, some of the other factors that may not have really been a consideration even as recently as 10 or 15 years ago. Honestly, if something sounds invasive, creepy, out of control, to me, when I'm hearing it, that's a situation I'm going to err on the side of shutting down. Even if there isn't a black and white legal concept, there's also the, you really want me to explain we just did what to a customer? And every single time I've entered into a conversation like that, the point's immediately been understood and the pivot has happened.
What are some key lessons that you've learned through your experiences in compliance? And how do they shape your approach to dealing with privacy compliance issues?
So I think that probably the biggest lesson I've learned is humility. You know, especially for somebody in a compliance or legal role, you want to be seen as the subject matter expert. You want the person asking you the question this time to come back and ask you the question next time. I've had to get myself very comfortable with saying, I don't know, let me go find out. Let me think about this. Let me go bounce this off a couple of other people instead of just being the binary yes or no person. Now that more often than not, my approach on privacy questions is let me go look at this, or even better, do you want to sit down and look through this with me together? We can pull up the regulations and see how they impact things. And very much it's fostered a sense of we're in this together.
What advice could you share either with those people just starting in the space or people who need a little bit of motivation, a little bit of encouragement about what they can keep in mind and what they can do as they're navigating their own journeys?
So, about once a year, I will stop and really think about how different privacy things affect me personally. That's an exercise I like to do with everything from the privacy notices that our companies send out to different regulations that are proposed that don't necessarily affect me from a business standpoint, but the things that the consumers are facing. Here's what it looks like if your credit card number is involved in a data breach. Here are all the steps that a consumer would have to take. Print this out and keep this list because it might happen to you someday, but also think about consumer touch points where a consumer is going to be nervous about the way that we are handling or protecting their data. Just thinking, okay, how would my mother or somebody else who doesn't have any sort of business background, doesn't have any experience in what I'm doing, how do I explain to them that I'm doing the right thing?
And to that point, Jill, thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lisa.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Compliance Chronicles, where we look for guidance and inspiration from the personal journeys of compliance professionals.